Hi everyone, and welcome back to the Southerners Northern Gardens. So it's been raining in Ohio every couple of days to every day for the past couple of weeks, so I haven't been able to do any content outside. And it rained yesterday. I'm just getting tired of the wet weather, so I decided to come inside today and sit down. And I wanted to do a video on seed selection, specifically vegetable seed selection for this coming year. So this video is titled, She Created a Monster. If you're new here, I'm really good friends with Jess from Roots and Refuge Farm. And so if you've watched my channel previously, you know that my granddad was a big gardener and grew lots of great, beautiful things in Alabama. And when I moved to Ohio, I was still living in an apartment until I was able to buy a home, and then when I bought a home, the first thing I did was put in a small vegetable garden. Now that vegetable garden has changed quite significantly over the past 4 years since that started, but I still put about the same things in there. I don't have a ton of vegetable gardening space. You've seen it on my channel, and I'll splash a quick picture on the screen. It's a small area, but it's just what we need. And then I'm also a big proponent of growing edible things in the landscape. So you know, I had some blueberries in my garden this past year in my ornamental garden. I ended up digging those up, however, in the fall because they just do not like our high alkaline soil, and I put them in a raised bed near our new fence line, so I could amend that soil and provide a more acidic environment for them. So for my next video, I will be going over my flower seed collection, which is here in this little box. It's not very well organized. However, for my vegetable and herb seed collection, I keep it pretty organized in this 4x6 photo container that you can pick up at any craft store. I just simply took a label maker and added the name of the type of seeds on here. So this one's melon specifically. I have one for peppers, peas, roots, greens, tomatoes, fruits, which I had some strawberry seeds in here, but I no longer grow strawberries from seed because they just take too long and the germination rate's fairly poor. I do have sunflowers in here just because I like to keep my sunflowers separate from my annual flower seeds over here. And then I have both annual and perennial herbs. So a lot of my seeds are fairly old. So this is the 4th year of me vegetable gardening, and I've been using some of the same seed packets since my original large purchase 4 years ago to start my garden. A lot of those seeds were purchased at the recommendation of Jess from Roots and Refuge Farm. There are some varieties I've thrown in here and there, but as most of you who watch her channel know, she grows most of her garden from seed completely unless she wants to get something started really quickly, and then she might buy starts of stuff. But mostly the cheapest and effective way of vegetable gardening is to grow things from seed. Now there is that upfront cost of purchasing all the seeds, and this is titled She Created a Monster because I spent quite a lot of money 4 years ago buying a lot of these seeds. But since that time, if you keep them dry and in a cold environment, these typically stay in the basement. I don't put them in the refrigerator or anything. Unless you're saving seeds that need to be vernalized for the next year, you may have to put them in the refrigerator. But this video is not about that. This is just going over my seeds that I'm going to be growing for 2022 in my vegetable garden. So this is my organization method I mentioned briefly. I've already picked out the selections I'm going to have in here. I have way more seeds than I could ever possibly grow in my garden just because I've collected so many over the years. And my method of vegetable gardening is, because I have a small space, I tend to grow all of my favorites, and then I throw in 1 or 2 new varieties each year, and it may become a favorite. I may not like it, and it'll get passed on and become an opportunity for a new favorite or a new opportunity the next year. So I spent some time a week or so ago going through my vegetable seed collection and picking out what I'm going to grow for 2022. In there, I went through this whole container. I went and checked what seeds I have, what seeds I might need to purchase. I have not purchased any vegetable gardening seeds or ornamental gardening seeds for 2022 yet. Everything I have is going to be left over. There are a couple varieties I want to get that I haven't purchased yet that I will be purchasing today after recording this video, and I will go over those as I get to them. So I'm just going to lay out the seeds I have here, and then we'll go over them by variety type. So the first variety type I'm going to go over is my pepper seed collection. I grow a variety of peppers, and last year was probably my best pepper year. I start them from seed. I will be doing seed starting later in the season. We get started a little later in Ohio because it's so cold, but peppers is one of the first vegetable seeds that I start because they need to be started earlier to get going pretty good before I stick them out in the garden. Last year I had some of the most beautiful pepper seed starts I have ever had, and they did really well, and I think it's because we had a little warmer winter, so I do all my seed starting in the basement. I have a video on my seed starting supplies. It was one of the first videos I put out on YouTube. So if it's a little rocky, just stick with it. I'll link it below if you want to watch that. I don't have any special grow lights or anything like that. Everything is items I purchased from Sam's Club, including the shelving and the lighting, to get you started, and it's fairly inexpensive. The lights themselves run $30, $35 a piece, and they're simply shop lights that are LED, but they do an excellent job getting seeds started until they need to go outside and acclimate to outside conditions. So for my peppers, I grow and have found these varieties. I don't throw in a whole lot of new pepper varieties each year, actually, because I do have my favorites already. And obviously those are jalapenos, which I grow Tam jalapeno and Craig's Grande jalapeno. Those are two I started growing last year, and I found they do really well. They don't seem to crack as much, and they get fairly large. I've grown the typical jalapeno seeds before, and they are really, really small, which is kind of frustrating when you're trying to pick and cut up jalapeno peppers to begin with. So Craig's Grande and Tam are the two that I stick with for jalapenos. Along with that, I throw in the jalapeno, which is a non-spicy jalapeno. And it is good to mix into dishes to get that jalapeno flavor without necessarily getting the spice. So you can mix in both your regular jalapenos and some jalapenos if you want some more jalapeno pepper without increasing the spice level of your dish. It's also good to add to salsa as well. And then I grow a couple varieties of bell peppers. Another reason I picked these specific bell peppers is because they do tend to do really well in my garden, and they get fairly large. So we have the California Wonder Bell and then the Keystone Resistant Giant. And I have found those do really well in my garden, and I haven't discovered another one that I'm going to switch to yet. I check every year on these varieties to see if there's anything I want to try, and these two have done really well over multiple seasons in my garden, so I'm sticking with those. Most of the peppers that I grow are bell peppers because I like to grow them and then I chop them and freeze them to add to dishes over winter, or I eat them fresh or raw with a little ranch dressing, and so they're really good, these two specific varieties. I also grow the 𝗟𝗶𝗸𝗲 pepper, which is this really long pepper here that gets kind of curly. It is an interesting variety. It is not hot. It is a sweeter pepper, and I just really love this specific variety. This year I tend to eat them just fresh as a snack, but this year I actually pickled them. I did some red onions, pickled red onions, or quick pickle red onions, and then I used the same brine to pickle some 𝗟𝗶𝗸𝗲 peppers, and I actually have them in the fridge now, and I'm snacking on them still from when I pickled the remaining varieties that I had left over in my last harvest in November. So these are really delicious. If you've never grown this variety, they're an interesting shape, really interesting to look at, very colorful, and just a great snacking pepper. And then I have this Proven Winners Hot and Heavy. It's a small pepper plant, but it produces a ton of peppers. You can get these seeds directly from provenwinners.com. They're fairly expensive. I think they're about $8 a pack, but it is a new variety that's just out recently to market, but it just produces a ton of peppers. But the plant is not very big, so if you're looking for a plant that gets really big, this is not it. But if you want a lot of product or produce from a pepper plant, these certainly produce a ton. The peppers aren't really big and they are pretty spicy, but it's a good variety. For my tomato varieties, I have gone true with the same tomatoes for a number of years, and this year I'm paring down my tomato varieties. I specifically grew quite a lot last year, and then I couldn't and wasn't able to get out and use all of the tomatoes because of so much ornamental gardening that I was doing, and a lot of them rotted on the vine, and I just couldn't keep up with the production that I was getting. So I'm paring down that quite significantly because I don't tend to do the canning process. I did that a couple years ago, and I spent an entire day or two processing tomatoes to make tomato sauce, and then only got a couple quarts of tomato sauce out of all the tomatoes I'd saved all summer. And so on my scale, I just don't have the room to grow enough tomatoes to make enough sauce for it to be worthwhile. And so I grow, and I'm going to grow for 2022 mainly for fresh eating. So the number one tomato in my garden that I like to grow, and you will hear Jess recommend, is Paul Robeson, I do not tend to like yellow variety tomatoes as much, or sweet tomatoes. I like a really kind of acidic tomato. 𝗟𝗶𝗸𝗲 is like a really smoky, like flavored tomato. It's not terribly acidic, but it works really well on a BLT, which we really love around here. And then I have Wild Boar Farms Blueberry Cherry. This is the only cherry tomato that I grow in my garden. It is absolutely amazing. There's also one called Blue Goldberry. I do not like that one as much because it is a little lighter in flavor and sweeter. The blueberry tends to be pretty acidic and is absolutely delicious, and I will just eat it every day when I come home from work. Typically I will go out there if there's one ripe and grab a handful of them and just eat them directly off the vine. Dr. Witchie's, although I don't like yellow tomatoes that much, this one is very good. Sometimes I'll eat it for breakfast with a little salt on it. It's just a really good mild yellow tomato that gets quite large, so it's really filling if you want to eat it for a snack, but it's also good on sandwiches, or you can throw it into a tomato salad. 𝗟𝗶𝗸𝗲 is one I'm going to be growing this year. I've grown this one previously. It's similar to 𝗟𝗏𝗲. It's just a really thick tomato that would be good for sauce, and so if I make any fresh salsa over the summer, this will be the one I pick. And I typically grow 𝗟𝗏𝗲 as well, and I have it in my selection. So I'll be growing 𝗟𝗏𝗲 as well. It's a determinate tomato, and it just produces a ton for me, and this is the same seed pack I've been using for 4 years. So 𝗟𝗏𝗲 again this year. And then proven winners that I grew last year called Garden Treasure. I haven't found anything particularly special about this variety. It produces really well. And so this is going to be kind of like my beefsteak type tomato that I'm going to be growing this year. So a rather small selection. I typically grow about 10 tomato plants, and I might pare that down to 8 or so over the next year, because I do want a variety and I want enough that I can eat a good amount at one time, because we like to make fresh pasta dishes with tomatoes as well. So that is my tomato selection for 2022. Fairly simple and easy. Now my cucumber selection for 2022 is also small. I usually grow 3 varieties over the past couple years. Those have been Boston Pickling, National Pickling, and I quickly, as of last year, stopped growing pickling cucumbers. They do not do well in my garden. They tend to go out and die rather quickly, but they also just turn yellow and get big super fast, and you have to really stay on picking them for them to be any good. So I have switched to Muncher cucumber as of last year, and I really love this variety. It's smaller, it doesn't have as many spines for me, and it produces really well. And then the Parisian pickling cucumber also did really well for me the past couple years, and so that one was going to be a staple in my garden. I've talked to Jess, and I'm going to be adding either the silver slicer or salt and pepper. Salt and pepper is supposed to be like the little brother or little sister of silver slicer, and so I'm going to give that one a try this year, and that's going to be my 3rd variety that I grow on my cattle panel trellis in my garden. So I'm also going to be growing like some green bean type varieties this year. This is called a strike bean. I've had these for a number of years, and I've never grown them. So I'm going to be trying these. I typically do not grow green beans because our neighbors next door grow an entire raised bed full of green beans, and they share with us, and so I save my gardening space for varieties that I can't get elsewhere. And so this year, since I've never grown them, I'm going to try and grow a few of them, and I may dedicate a pretty big space for them. I don't know. I'm going to think about it. And those are going to go somewhere in my garden. For melons, I always grow watermelon, so I have the Crimson Sweet, and I also have a baby bush watermelon I think I don't have with me that I typically grow. These grow really well for me. I grew a huge watermelon the past year and the year before that, and then this year again I'm going to be growing 𝗟𝗶𝗸𝗲 melons from this pack I have, or from some seeds I saved. So I think this pack of 𝗟𝗟𝗲 melons Jess had sent me a couple years ago had been cross-pollinated at Baker Creek with cantaloupes, and they were some of the most delicious melons that I got off those specific seeds. You could tell one plant was a true 𝗟𝗟𝗲 melon plant. I planted a couple of them, and then one plant was a cross, and the seeds from the cross, or the melons from the cross, were so delicious, and they're just perfect size for snacking. So 𝗟𝗟𝗲 melon it is, from this specific packet or from seeds I saved from the cross. For salad greens, I don't have any typical like selection that I pick. I usually do a salad bowl mix like this one right here. Sometimes I will just run into the big box store and grab a mixed lettuce. Paris Island 𝗂𝗃 romaine is also really good. So I like to use the cut and come again method for lettuce. I plant a bunch of them together and then I just trim off leaves as I need them, and they continue to produce instead of letting them head up and then cutting the lettuce because I just don't have the space to do any other method. I have some 𝗟𝗏 spinach here. Tree lettuce, which I grew maybe 2 or 3 years ago, which is a really interesting variety. It produces a huge stalk and then produces these huge lettuce leaves that grow up that stalk, and I'm going to try it again this year. I got pretty good production out of it a few years ago, but it's also just a great way to grab just a few leaves to make an entire salad because the leaves are so large. I'm going to grow mustard this year. This is Japanese Giant Red. I've never grown this variety. It was a free seed from Baker Creek several years ago, and so we're going to try that and see how it works into salad in my garden. As far as kale, specifically in brassicas, the only brassicas I really grow are kale, and I've grown numerous varieties, and kale is one of my favorite things to add to soups and just eat raw with salads during the summer. And so last year I grew red 𝗟𝗏𝗲, which is also called in some locations ragged jack. The leaves on this kale is very interesting. It also tends to be a little more tender, and so it's good for fresh eating. Casper kale was just really good last year. It's a smaller plant, but it produces really beautiful green leaves with this white stems here. And here is ragged jack. So red 𝗟𝗏𝗲, I have a pack for both. So this was a free seed from Baker Creek a few years ago, and it's called Russian red or ragged jack. And then we have the typical blue Scotch curled kale, which I grow every year. Scarlet kale, which is a beautiful addition to any salad just for the color. And lacinato kale, which is also called dinosaur kale, which is more of a flat leaf that's kind of bubbly. It's really good in salads as well. So a lot of people complain about kale because it gets kind of bitter during the summer. I don't find that to be as much of an issue where I live. Our summers can get pretty hot, but the kale tends to stay pretty tasty throughout the year. It can get a little bitter in summer, and my kale, I've actually had it live all winter through my garden and come back in the spring. I don't have any this year because I pulled everything out of my garden, but that is possible in our zone, at least if our winters aren't too bad, to get a little kale out of your garden in winter without any winter protection, I have found anyway. An interesting variety is called walking stick kale. I think I've tried to grow this variety before. The seed packet is open. I'm not sure if I had success with germination, but I'm going to try that again. It's kind of like the tree lettuce. It produces this very large stalk and just grows really, really tall. And so that's going to be an interesting choice I'm going to add to my garden this year. And then I'm going to be growing multiple varieties of Swiss chard. This is one variety that I have on hand. It's called Oreo Orange. Swiss chard is one of my favorite things to make a little salad with as well, and as a lettuce substitute because the lettuce tends to bolt really quickly around here when it gets warm. And so Swiss chard doesn't tend to do that for me. And so I will grow Swiss chard throughout the summer if I can keep it in a partially shaded location under some other vegetables in my garden. And it produces really well throughout the summer and creates a great lettuce substitute. I will be growing a typical Black Beauty zucchini. Those are kind of standard. I grow them early in the spring. I don't get a ton off of them before squash bugs come in and take them over. The first couple years that I grew in my garden, I didn't have an issue with squash bugs, but I have read that once you have squash bugs, they return to where they were, and every year my plants get eat up with squash bugs. I'm not growing any pumpkins this year. I did grow, or I might grow a small one called Little Jack. I grew pumpkins 2 years ago and had a really great harvest, but they took up all of the mini orchard space that I have that I can be growing other things in, and so I'm just not going to dedicate that space to a lot of pumpkins this year. I will probably grow a small one just for decorations in the fall, but as far as big pumpkins like I had the year before, I'm not going to be doing that this year. As far as herbs that I grow every year, I try to grow cilantro. Our zone, and specifically where I live, grows from really cold in winter to really warm really quickly, and I have a really hard time keeping cilantro from bolting. And so this is slow bolt cilantro, but I don't find that it's any better than any regular cilantro. So as usual, I will sow it very late winter and that way I can get some cilantro out of the garden in early spring before it gets too warm. There's a variety, a different herb called culantro, which I tried to germinate last year or the year before, and I could not get it to germinate. I may have had a bad batch of seeds, and so I'm going to seek that out again at a seed sale this year and see if I can pick that up and get that to germinate, because it's supposed to like the heat a little more, and it tastes similar to cilantro, and so I could add that to salsa. A couple years ago, I tried to germinate flat leaf parsley. It never germinated, and then I dumped the seeds out in my garden, just emptying my seed starting containers in the spring, and then it came up everywhere. And so I had it for 2 years. Parsley is a biennial, and so it will grow the first year, and the second year it goes to seed and dies. And so I'm going to be putting some more flat leaf parsley in my garden just for fresh eating with some tomatoes. We have dill, which I grow every year. Careful if you grow dill. It is great for the pollinators to let it flower, but do not let it go to seed or it will be coming up everywhere in your garden. I had that mistake a year ago. I let my dill go to seed because I wasn't paying too much attention to it, and I had it coming up in the lawn and all over the paths of my vegetable garden. And so dill is always going to be in my garden because I love it, but careful watching it go to seed. Lemongrass. I grew lemongrass a couple years ago. I haven't used it as far as eating, but I love the way it smells and just having it nearby. Lemon basil, one of my favorite basils besides just the regular big leaf basil. It smells really great. It's great to add to lemonade, and I just like having it around to run my fingers through it. And as far as regular basil, the past couple years I seed started both big leaf basil from seed, but I've started going with a Amazel basil from Proven Winners, which you can pick up at a local garden center, instead of germinating basil from seed, because this Amazel basil is not supposed to change flavor when it goes to seed, and it just produces a ton of basil, and I only need one plant in my garden to produce as much basil as I would need throughout the season. And that, everyone, is pretty much my 2022 vegetable seed starting collection that I've gathered here. There may be a few things that I add here and there as I find them. I may go back through my seed collection here, and I will of course be looking on seed websites and locally for interesting varieties that I can add to my garden. But if you have a small space, these are some varieties that will take up, a minimal amount of space in your garden and allow you to get started. Some of my favorites that I've grown for almost 4 years that do well in our climate in Southwest Ohio. Let me know what your favorite varieties are and what you'll be starting in 2022. If you think there's something that I might be interested in, drop it below. If you have any comments or questions, leave them below and I'll answer them as I get to them. And remember, in a world full of hate, be a light. Take care, everyone. Bye.